and I shall be the vicar for today. I shall be reading the lesson. Right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We have now started going live. Can I say welcome to you all to Breckland Planning for today, and good to see a good turnout for the new year. I would say Happy New Year to you all, but that's all gone and forgotten about now. We're nearly near Valentine's Day. Let me just do what we call our general housekeeping. First of all, oh, sorry, I got the wrong sheet there. Fire exits. Fire exits are quite clearly marked on these two doors here. There's another door at the end of the corridor where the lavatories are, and of course the entrance door where you came in. I have no tests down for today, so if we hear the bell and goes off, then we will evacuate the building and congregate in the car park. If you're not sure where you're heading to, just follow any of this lot, because they'll be out first, I promise you. They're not very brave, they just look it. Could I ask you also to switch off your mobile devices, phones and things, or put them onto silent. If your phone does go off and disturbs my meeting, then it's a fine of £10 to the chairman's charity. And it's not me as the chairman of the planning, it's the chairman of the council. And one of his charities is Papyrus. And there was another one, or is it? Mind. That's the one I always forget. So it's either your £5 will probably go to Papyrus and £5 to Mind. So in the end of the day, you'll do good by being naughty. So it rebalances itself. Procedure, as each item is called, I've got a list of people who wish to speak, and they will come and sit where my examples are here on my first item. And I will get the officer to do the presentation, and then I will command when they want to speak, and then we'll follow through like that. They have allotted times, and when your time is finished, you will hear the bell. And the bell doesn't mean your room is ready. It just means that we've heard enough of you, and if you'd like to be quiet, or at least sum up, come to the end of your sentence. The end of your sentence is not 15 more minutes, it's please finish, because we want to get on. And then we'll take it from there. Let me introduce my staff for today. On my left-hand side, I have Mike Horn, Solicitor of the Council. Simon Wood, who's got a lovely official title, but I'm going to call him Head Honcho. On my right-hand side, I have Rebecca Collins, who is my right-hand woman, or right-hand person, should I say? Sorry. Whoops, dangerous ground there. We also have, joining us later, Chris Hobson, who's one of my chief officers. We've got Lisa O'Donovan, Matthew Blackie, who are the couple sitting at the back. That's not a husband and wife team, they are just sitting close together. And my ushers today, I've got Mandy Cunningham. Good to see you again, Mandy. Thanks for coming in today. And also Chris Fitzgerald, who are the guys who have been telling you where to go. And I've also got Ruth Tudge. Oh, she's gone out of the room. Oh, she's on the other side of the door. And with her should be Finley Williams. Oh, he's there. Well done, Finley. Finley Williams, who is our new apprentice, who's joining Democratic Services. So he's going to watch and see how all this is done. And it's a good job we're on the ground floor. So if he does decide to jump out the window, he's not going to break a leg or anything. And also my most important woman of all those is Julie Britton, our thank you, a big little cheer there for you, our Democratic Services Officer, who will be taking minutes and keeping us corrected on the internet and what have you. Okay, thanks, that's terrific. So now we're going to start for today. Item 1 on our agenda are the minutes. I judge you've all read them, and can I have your authority to sign those minutes off, please? I agreed, thank you very much. No items from those minutes? No, good. Thank you very much, Julie. Okay. Item 2, apologies and substitutes. Julie.
Thank you, Chairman. I have apologies from Councillor Mark Kiddle-Morris, and Councillor Taylor is in attendance as his substitute.
Okay, thank you very much, Taylor, for coming in today. Okay, item 3, declarations of interest and representations received. We will take those as each item is raised. Chairman's announcements. Well, like I said, it's too late to wish you a happy new year, so I'll try and catch you early next year. But just to bring you up to date, the site visit for Old Buckingham, which was in the morning, has changed to the afternoon, and now it's going to change because it clashes with another event. So we will be in touch to tell you of another day. All right, we do apologise for the confusion, but it became a site visit initially where, well, I wasn't going to be there. Rebecca wasn't going to be there. I don't think anybody was going to be there. So if anyone wanted to go and stand in a field on their own, they could have done. But we thought it best to rearrange that. That's all I've got to say. Item 5, request to defer applications. Do we have any at all?
None today, thank you, Chairman.
Okay, keep your mic on. Item 6, urgent business.
None today, thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go to item 7. Over to you, please, Simon, for the local plan update.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a brief update today. Members will be aware that the issues and options consultation document went to Cabinet last Monday and was approved for consultation. This followed what I think is agreed to be a fairly successful meeting just before Christmas with parish and town councillors to go through the paper and introduce them to it, so that when the consultation document arrives, they have some knowledge what's in it and what we're seeking to achieve and want from them in relation to it. Alongside that, we are seeking to appoint a consultation expert in terms of community engagement to run alongside the consultation process for the issues and options paper. We anticipate that the consultation will go out probably in the first half of February, but we will keep members up to speed on that. Just a couple of other matters. Members will be aware that the day before Christmas Eve, with impeccable timing as always, a consultation on the National Planning Policy Framework was issued. It's quite a lengthy consultation, and we have until the 2nd of March to respond to that. We are planning to take a paper to Cabinet on the 6th of February, which will set out the main issues and some initial thoughts around it for members and the executive to discuss. And we are hopeful that we would be able to use the all-member local plan briefing on the 7th of February to have a discussion around that, and we will send papers out in advance of that and confirm it a little bit nearer the date. Just another matter in relation to the local plan update. We are close to agreeing the housing and economic development needs assessment tender to assess housing need and economic need within the district to inform the local plan, and that will be going out within the next couple of weeks. And that's something that has been put together not only by planning policy, but also with our colleagues in housing strategy and with our colleagues in economic regeneration and growth as well. So covering a lot of bases there, but it should be a comprehensive document and evidence base that will allow us to fully inform the local plan update. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Questions from members? No? Good. Was I the only one that imagined that consultation on the day before Christmas Eve, that someone said, what should we do with this? And someone said, just press send. The Christmas party is starting soon, just press send. Good. That was just me. Good. Okay, so as I say, moving swiftly on, we go to item 8, which is the deferred applications, of which we have the one for Griston. And I should have my speakers. I've got Councillor Andy Parsons, Griston Parish Council. Oh, down there, sir. Good. Mr. Philip Leslie, who's the applicant. There, sir. John Heath, Griston Community Group. Thank you. And Councillor Philip Cohen, who's the ward rep. And that's the agent there. Yes, you're general. Sorry, so I haven't got you on my list, but that's okay. You're there for questions? Yep. Okay, if necessary. You're not speaking, that's fine. Okay, so this item, we go over to you, please, Rebecca.
Thank you, Chairman. So the application in front of you today was deferred from Planning Committee on the 4th of October. Since that time, there's been an update to the description of development, so I will read that out for you members. The description of development is for the demolition of units 1 to 6, the whole of the western boundary, and we'll obviously show you a plan of the site shortly. Units 17 to 30, part 13, part of the northern block, extensions to units 14 and 15, a large extension to the northern block, extension to unit 16, a small extension to the southern block, external fascia changes, refurbishment of unit 17, a change of the use of the whole site to a mixed B2 and Class E offices, and the reconfiguration of the parking and the creation of a new loading and unloading area. Apologies. The description of development, as I've set out, has been updated during the course of an application, and a full reconsultation has taken place on the latest description of development, and the comments received to that full consultation are reflected in the report in front of you and the supplementary report. So this is the application site, the aerial photography showing the application site, the layout of the buildings within that site as they are currently. You can see a range of buildings along the northern boundary, coming down the western boundary of the site, and just to the west is the prison there, and a large square block of buildings on that southern building, which include offices as referenced in the description of development. So here is the location plan that has been submitted with the application. So these are the buildings, the range of buildings that are laid out on the site currently. And you can see that the central white area there is currently used for car parking. You'll also note the access to the site there to the eastern boundary, and that will remain in its position. And obviously we'll show you that on some images shortly. So this is a zoomed in version of that site plan, just to show the existing layout of the site, where the existing buildings sit, the car parking and the access to the site. I'll come on to that in a second. And then this is the proposed site plan for the layout of the buildings as set out in the description. So members will note from the officer report that
Sorry, did someone have a problem or? No? Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. So members will note, as set out in the officer report, there are a number of objections which have been received from local people with regards to the application, including objections from Griston and Cashton Parish Council, and these are set out in the officer's report for members' reference. Members will also note, however, that there are no statutory objections for those set out in the report from our statutory consultees, but you will note from the flood risk section that there is an outstanding matter with the LLFA where they require further drainage information, and we have requested later in the report that this matter is delegated to officers in the event that the application was to be recommended for approval. Just as a further update, members will note from the supplementary report that there is an objection summarised in there, and we've had 2 further representations received from members of the public, but the matters that they raised are already set out in the report and addressed in the report and or the supplementary report. So moving on to the application itself. With regards to the principle of development in this location, your officers have considered the relevant policies in this regard, particularly policy Gen 01 of the Breckland Local Plan, which seeks to enable development that improves economic and social and environmental objectives of Breckland, and to allocate and facilitate developable land that seeks to provide access to homes, employment, retail, leisure and other facilities. Members, the site is located within the Griston settlement boundary, where development is generally supported in principle by policy Gen 03 of your local plan. However, this site is not identified as a general employment area in accordance with policy EC03, and therefore policy EC04 of the local plan is relevant with regards to development outside employment development outside designated employment areas. You'll note from the report where EC04 is listed in full that in order for a development outside a general employment area to be acceptable, there have to be no other sites, it has to be demonstrated that there are no other sites available on identified or allocated employment sites. And then if this isn't the case, then there has to be a reason for those that employment to be located outside, and it gives in policy EC04 those reasons in terms of the expansion of an existing business or a business that's based on agriculture or an industry which isn't suitable on an employment site or close to residential areas. You'll note from the officer report that it quite clearly sets out that this development does not accord with any of those matters outlined in EC04. And it talks significantly about the planning balance and how we apply that. So for members' benefits, as you're already aware, we apply section 38(6) to any planning application, which is reiterated in the NPPF and the Town and Country Planning Act, which sets out that you determine applications in accordance with the development plan, and you have to consider the development plan as a whole. So I've already set out some policies that the proposal does comply with, but specifically it doesn't comply with EC04. And also you have to consider other relevant material considerations. And those relevant material considerations do include the National Planning Policy Framework. Now, just to go back a slide for you members, is clear enough on the screen. So just to explain the site as it currently exists at the moment. So within the site, which is considered to be a mixed-use employment site in existence at the time, there are a number of buildings that exist on this site currently. Some of those buildings have restricted conditions and permissions on them. And this slide is trying to set out how the site's laid out and any restrictions on that site. So members will note from this slide, to the north of the application site, there are two sections of industrial buildings. These will remain as part of the proposed application and are to be extended to the south. So this building here, this is restricted as ancillary storage to B1, B8 use by condition, and this is set out in paragraph 1.5 of your officer report. This section here, which is also to remain and be extended to the south, is restricted only as light industrial, was permitted as light industrial, apologies. This entire western section is not restricted and has an employment use permission on it. This square section to the south of the application site, this is a permitted operation for light industrial, but has a restrictive condition on it that restricts the use of those buildings to Paragon Print Limited only. And then this final blue section here has a restrictive condition on it for ground floor storage and first floor offices. This section in the centre is not restricted either, but has been in use as offices. This is relevant to the application because the applicant has applied for full planning permission, which includes the use of all the buildings, including the extensions for B2 use and ancillary offices in those office locations that I've already pointed out. So as I've already set out, there is considered to be non-compliance with policy EC04, but officers have looked at the other material considerations which are relevant to the planning permission. In particular, there is the NPPF, and particularly section 6 is relevant. And section 6 of the NPPF supports the investment of business, including expansion and adaptation. Paragraph 81 of section 6 specifically says that we should help to create conditions in which businesses can invest, expand and adapt, and significant weight should be placed on the need to support economic growth and productivity, taking into account local business needs and wider opportunities for development. And paragraph 84 of section 6 encourages sustainable growth and expansion of all types of business in rural areas, both through the conversion of existing buildings and well-designed new buildings. Having regard to section 6, it is officers' opinion that the use of this site for business would allow businesses to invest, expand and adapt in accordance with section 6. And this is a material consideration weighing in favour of this proposal. It is agreed that by allowing this permission, there is an opportunity to regulate this site with appropriate conditions to ensure the long-term viability of the business, as well as the protection of existing and future residents through appropriate operating hours and noise restrictions. In this regard, also, the proposal is considered to represent the expansion of a business within the district through the conversion of existing buildings and well-designed new buildings which fit with the character of the existing. It also provides a holistic approach to an existing mixed-use to employment site, as well as expansion and adaptation. And the impact of roads has been considered by the Highways Authority and is considered acceptable. And I'll further go into detail in that later. Having specific regard to paragraph 85 of the NPPF, it is noted that the Highways Authority comments that this proposal will involve the moving of jobs from a sustainable location in Attleborough with choices of how to travel to work to Griston, which is likely to result in staff being heavily reliant on the private car. However, the existing site itself and the buildings shown here are existing and do have an employment use on them, and they are not too unsimilar in scale to that proposed, and would likely attract employees if fully occupied, travelling in the way as described by private car. And on this basis, the Highways Authority raises no objection to the latter in terms of sustainability and access to work, or in terms of impact on highway use or highway safety. Members will note from later in the report and the conditions that as officers, we've suggested a travel plan condition is proposed as recommended in the transport statement submitted by the applicants, that they can implement a successful transport statement in this location. But what we have done here in terms of the principle is we balance the existing jobs and the travel to work against that's what's proposed. And we consider that on that basis, that it's an existing mixed employment use that would attract people travelling by car, that this in terms of sustainability is acceptable. The proposed development is considered to be making effective and efficient use of the previously developed land, and this is considered to be in compliance with section 11 of the NPPF. And this is evidenced in the use of existing buildings and the proposed extensions, which is also a material consideration in the determination of this application. The proposal itself is in part conversion and part rebuild of an existing commercial site in Griston. The use of the existing buildings and site could intensify at any time, especially given the approved B1, B8 storage use to the north, which does not restrict hours of use or HGV movements. This site is an existing mixed-use employment site and not a new employment site, which is a material consideration. And despite the conflict with policy EC04, the proposal does comply with policies Gen 01 and Gen 03 and considering the overall other material considerations, which do weigh heavily in favour, including the NPPF and the existing use of the site. And it is on this basis that officers have concluded that the principle of development is established in this location. Moving on to the access into the site and the highways impacts. So an improved access, improved visibility displays at the point of access are proposed, and these are conditioned in the list of conditions at the end of the report for members, and this was recommended by the Highways Authority. A new loading and unloading area is proposed, and you can see the access to the site in front of you. Those vehicles will come into the site, turn within the site, surrounded by existing buildings, and then come out of the site using the loading and unloading area. That's proposed within the centre of the site, You will note from the officer report that the Highways Authority state that it would be difficult to substantiate an objection in principle to the proposal. You will also note, members, from the report that the concerns have been raised by local people, that the Highways Authority were not aware of the consents and permissions that were already in existence when they gave this opinion, and I've explained those consents to you on the previous slide. For members' information, the Highways Authority have been aware of the previous permissions and conditions on site. They have provided further comments, which are listed in your report, and they still have no objection to the application in highway safety terms. And in this regard, officers have given consideration to the fallback position. Members will note we've considered the fallback position at other planning committees, but for members' reference, the full case law is set out in the report, but the most relevant case law set out that there were 3 elements to the fallback test. And those elements were whether there is a fallback use and whether there is a lawful ability to undertake such a use, whether there is a likelihood or real prospect of such use occurring, and if in answer to the second question is yes, a comparison between the fallback and the proposed development. And this assessment of the fallback position with regards to these 3 tests is obviously set out in your report from paragraph 2.11. So the site with regard to point 1 is a mixed use employment site, which could be in use without the requirement for further permissions for the uses on those buildings as given and as previously set out. And we are noting that parts of the site are restricted in use by conditions. That said, there are also unrestricted buildings to the north and west of the site, and also parts of the office block can be lawfully used without a further planning permission. The southern building block has a B2 use, and although this is restricted by condition to Paragon Print Limited, this is considered to be a B2 operation. We have looked at the reasons for these restricted conditions that were applied to Paragon Print and the building to the south, so this square building to the south in this regard. And the reason for the condition was to retain control over development, which could become detrimental to the appearance of the locality. It is worth noting that these conditions were not restrictive due to highways or amenity impacts. The proposals are to convert these buildings and clad them, and therefore this would retain the appearance of these buildings locally, so in accordance with the reason for the condition. It is likely that a continuation of a B2 use with offices would be acceptable to the council if an application was received to vary these conditions, and this would result in an unrestricted, in terms of highway movements, B2 use. It would be unreasonable for the council to require a building, especially of this scale, to remain empty, and therefore we consider there is real prospect that the southern block would also operate at a much higher capacity than its current empty use. On this basis, the proposal is considered to comply with point 1 of the fallback position as set out in case law, having regards to highways movements on the basis that these buildings could lawfully operate as employment uses, generating a much higher degree of traffic movements than that proposed. And that was what was set out by the Highways Authority in the responses to the application. With regards to point 2, the likelihood or real prospect, in the relevant case law, real prospect was defined as not needing to be probable or likely. A possibility would suffice, and that has been had regard to in our assessment of the application. So also, given the submission of this application and the amendments, it demonstrates a clear desire of the landowner to develop and maximise the value of the site. This is an existing brownfield site, a mixed-use employment site, which could be more intensively used than is currently being proposed, especially with regards to traffic and HGV movements, and that's having regard to that B1, B8 storage use to the north of the site. It is unlikely that the council could reasonably refuse planning permission to vary the occupation-specific condition for Paragon Print, that southern block of buildings, and prevent future use of these buildings for employment uses, especially B2 use, given the existing use. And in that regard, we think that the proposal does comply with point 2 of the fallback position, and the answer to that question would be a yes. The fallback position, therefore, is that the site could operate at a more intense capacity. The applicants state in their submission that they have a real commitment to operate on this site. The fallback position is a mixed-use employment area, in part unrestrained, which has the ability to operate at a much higher capacity, in part without planning permission. And although permission will be required to remove personal conditions, it is very likely that the B2 use could not reasonably be refused for the southern block of buildings on the site. The proposal seeks to use existing buildings, and the proposal provides an opportunity to provide jobs, a new business in a rural area, and regulate the site through the imposition of conditions to control noise, layout, visibility, and manage HGVs over a more piecemeal form of development that could arise should the applicant seek to implement permitted development rights and re-let the existing buildings in their current form. The use of the site and the number of highway movements could significantly intensify without planning permission, and this is a material consideration. As I previously set out, the Highways Authority cannot substantiate a highways objection to the uses being changed to B2, and having regard to the other material consideration of the fallback position, which has been given significant weight in the planning balance. And in this regard, we think that a B2 operation use on this site is acceptable, having regard to the fallback position and highway safety and impact. Moving on to with regards to the layout of the site. So initially, the Highways Authority have raised concerns with regards to insufficient car parking. The applicants have provided information to demonstrate they have a workforce of approximately 55 to 65 staff. The site, as it currently exists, has 146 car parking spaces, and using the Highways Authority guidance with regards to the requirement for car parking spaces, this would result in a requirement for 159 spaces for the floor space proposed for this development. Initially, it was proposed only to provide sufficient car parking for the number of staff and visitors. However, subsequently, through discussions with the applicant and the Highways Authority, the applicants have increased the amount of car parking on site and proposed to provide 96 spaces. The Highways Authority have been consulted in this regard, and they raise no objections, but suggest a condition to restrict the entire site to a personal permission, i.e. eastern attachments, so that the car parking provision meets that of what is needed for this operation. The reason for that condition would be for a sufficient supply of car parking. So in the future, if that condition would be varied, it would be varied on the basis of that consideration. Requests have been made in the representations received both by Caston, Griston Parish Council and residents in the local area to reduce speed limits and introduce traffic calming measures on surrounding roads, including through Caston. These requests are not supported by the Highways Authority, and therefore no conditions have been appended to the report on that basis. Concerns have also been raised regarding the width of the Highways Authority. The Highways Authority have confirmed that the carriageway width is acceptable, but the geometry of the access is such that, as demonstrated, HGVs will need to oversail the opposing running lane when turning left, which the Highway Authority state the access does not cater for left turns by HGV traffic without the vehicle needing to utilising the opposing traffic lane to carry out the manoeuvre. However, this is a situation which currently exists with HGVs, and therefore on this basis of the authorised use of the site and the fact that it could intensify without planning permission, then access improvements are not considered necessary to make this application acceptable, and a condition is not recommended on this basis. The Highways Authority do not object to the application in that regard. Also, the Highways Authority has recommended a routing condition. However, members, we have discussed this at length previously, but this type of condition does not meet the test of applying condition as set out in planning legislation and the NPPF, as it would not be reasonable or enforceable to do so. On this basis, we are unable to apply a routing condition, and for the reasons previously given, and currently high HGV movements to and from the site are not restricted in this way, and therefore we haven't provided a routing condition to the permission, but members will note from the conditions listed at the end of the report, we have suggested a HGV management plan, which will include measures such as signage and information given to drivers for the site, and that way we can enforce that condition. Obviously the signage is physical, and we can check that that information is being passed from the applicants to any future drivers. In summary, the Highways Authority do not object to the application. Significant weight has been given to the fallback position, and this being an existing mixed-use employment site. Proposals are not considered to have an unacceptable impact on highway safety, and nor would the residual cumulative impacts on the road network be severe. And based on the advice of the Highways Authority and having regard to the relevant policies, no objection is raised in highway safety terms. With regards to layout and design, the proposal includes the demolition of 1,815 square metres of existing industrial units and the new build of 3,081 square metres of industrial units. And this results in a net increase of 1,266 square metres. The two-storey building to the south of the site will not be altered. However, there will be external fascia changes, and I'll just show you the images of that building. So you'll note just to the top in image and the left-hand side of your screen, those are the two offices above with storage below, and there will be fascia changes to those buildings. And then the rest of that southern block is, other than fascia changes, is to remain as per the photos, which you'll see in a moment. The northern block of buildings, members, is to be extended. So this existing non-hatch building, this is an existing block to the north of the site, and then the extensions to that block are the hatched elements. And you can see, members, this blue line is the existing block of buildings that exists on the site. As I've already set out, there will be a reconfiguration, easy for me to say, a reconfiguration of the parking. And that will come to the centre sections of the site, and there will be a new acoustic fence to the southern element of the site. So this will ensure that all HGVs and light good vans are kept away from the main access point and are surrounding by those buildings. So those movements and vehicle traffic will all be to the centre of the site. The materials proposed with for the building are consistent with those materials already that are shown on site, and the materials are listed in the report at 3.4 for you. And we do have obviously some images of the site for you later. It is noted in the comments received for residents that we would prefer to see a different materials used on the elevations of the proposed building facing neighbouring properties. That's specifically along this northern elevation with these residential properties just to the north of the site. However, given the redesign of the building, so I'll come on to this in the amenity section, but previously where this straight line, it carried along the boundary of the site. So it was perpendicular with the boundary of the site. It's now been moved, so it carries a diagonal line away from the site. And also the eaves height has been lowered. And like I say, when I speak about the amenity section, I'll come on to that. But given the redesign of this element of the building, the separation, which you can see on the screen in front of you, from the boundaries on site, the materials proposed are considered appropriate and acceptable in this instant, and they are consistent with the existing building materials across the site. And on that basis, we consider that the design and layout is acceptable in this location and accords with the relevant policies of the local plan. Moving on to the amenity, members will note from paragraph 4.2 of their report, there are a number of proposed noise mitigation measures that have been proposed by the applicant. All these mitigation measures and noise elements have been considered by your environmental health team, who were consulted with regard specifically regard with the use of noise, and specifically regard with noise. They say that the levels within the accompanying noise report indicate that development will comply with WHO guidelines and the levels required for both internal noise and noise within garden areas. Although the guidance does state that levels around 5+ dB above the background levels are likely to be an indication of an adverse effect, it does state that this must be put in context, and that the applicant's noise report argues that the ambient noise levels are sufficiently high to mask the 5+ dB. I also note that noise is within normal working hours of the day. On that basis, members, your environmental health team are unable to object to the application, despite the fact that the noise development may well be clearly audible within garden areas of the immediately adjacent domestic properties. And on that basis, they have requested conditions to alleviate these noise impacts and regulate the development. And those requested conditions have been applied to and listed in the report and the supplementary. Further to this, the matter of environmental health comments being made available on the website, further objections were received, and we've consulted with regards to these objections with environmental health, and they state there appears to be some confusion between the ambient noise level and the background level. The ambient noise level of 57 dB is a totally encompassing sound measurement at the time of the noise survey. And this has been used in this case to justify that although the noise levels exceed the calculated background level, it is still low compared to the overall sound of everything that was audible at the time of the survey. And on that basis, environmental health raised no objection to the proposals. Concerns were also subsequently raised with regards to the scrap bin dump and the slag dump. This has been discussed with environmental health, and given that this use would take place over a very short period of time, environmental health considered that the figures that are used for calculating noise and amenity impact from this are likely to be low and not significant enough to warrant refusal by the planning permission. Other amenity concerns have also been raised with regards to disturbance, particularly from HGVs and employees on the site, pollution, as well as the proposed buildings being overbearing and overshadowing neighbouring properties. With regards to noise and disturbance from HGVs, it is considered that HGV use could intensify for this site without the need for planning permission. Here, it is appropriate again to consider the fallback position. And members will note the configuration on site, which does ensure that HGVs and light goods vans are kept away from the main access into the site and reduce nuisance and noise for the adjacent neighbouring properties. The applicant has committed to using white noise reversing sensors along with those other noise mitigation measures that are outlined from paragraph 4.2 of your report. And taking this into consideration along with the fallback position with regards to highways and HGV movements, then it is not considered that the noise and disturbance from existing vehicles is a reason to refuse planning permission for this proposal. With regards to overbearing and overshadowing, and I've just set this out, but I will set it out again. To the north of the site, the building has been redesigned to follow an angle away from neighbouring properties off Bramley Lane, which are the properties to the north of the application site, similar to that of the existing building line of the buildings that exist on the site currently. So just to explain again, initially we had a design of buildings which run in a straight line across this boundary. There is a neighbouring property garden just to the north here. The buildings ran in a straight line perpendicular to the boundary of the site. In discussions with the applicant following concerns that were raised by that particular neighbouring property, they have since angled the building away from that boundary, and members will note the blue on the site is the current building that sits in this location and the angle away from the boundary. And therefore the new building now follows slightly further away from the boundary, but is an angle away from those neighbouring properties to reduce the impact, particularly on this neighbouring property. And also previously there was a parapet wall that extended up from the eaves of the building, which increased the height of the building along the boundary of this property. That parapet wall has subsequently also been removed to reduce the height. And given now the separation distance from the boundary, the removal of that parapet wall and the difference in ground levels on site, the impact on neighbours in terms of overshadowing and overbearing is considered to be acceptable. With regards to light pollution, it is not considered that increased traffic movements from that over and above how the site could operate without this planning permission would be so significant to warrant refusal of planning permission. And in addition, the proposals include ventilation and equipment to deal with pollution from works proposed, and these will be regulated by health and safety and environmental health. Environmental health raised no objections to the proposal on this basis. The proposal is not considered to have significant amenity impact in comparison to that what will lawfully operate on the site, taking into consideration the fallback position and the material considerations, including compliance with policy COM 03, and the proposal is considered acceptable in amenity terms. With regards to ecology, an ecology assessment has been undertaken. We have consulted on that ecology assessment with our ecologists who raised no objection, subject to securing mitigation and enhancement measures, and this is to be done through condition on the application, and those are listed at the end of your report. Please note it has been concluded that the proposed development could potentially affect local populations of bats and breeding birds. Appropriate mitigation measures have been specified that would ensure that any adverse effect on these groups would be avoided, reduced or compensated. And further ecological enhancements, including the installation of bat and bird boxes, have been specified, which would ensure that the proposed development would deliver a proportionate level of biodiversity net gain. And on this basis, our ecologist or Natural England raises no objection, and it is considered acceptable in ecology terms. Members will note from the beginning, I said that the LLFA have been consulted, and they're concerned that there is an absence of an acceptable drainage strategy. The applicants are working with the LLFA as we speak with regards to that drainage strategy. And therefore, if members were to vote to approve planning permission today, we ask that the matter of the drainage strategy is delegated to officers, and planning permission would only be issued on the basis of no objections from the LLFA. With regards to trees and hedgerows, an arboricultural impact assessment was undertaken and submitted with the application. The tree officer has been consulted in this regard, and subject to a condition setting out the works in the submitted arboricultural assessment are complied with, then they have no objection to the application, and this is a condition recommended. You'll note from the comments that some trees have already been removed from the site along the western boundary with the prison. However, these trees were not protected, and therefore this is not a consideration of this application. With regards to contamination, the phase 1 desk survey that was undertaken recommended a phase 2 survey. Our contaminated land officer has been consulted on this basis and raises no objections to the proposals, subject to an appropriate contaminated land condition, which has been applied to the list of conditions at the end of your report. Members will note in paragraph 9.2, we reference conditions, and that there was a request from the applicants to extend some of the conditions, particularly with regards to working hours. Environmental health initially objected to this extension of working hours, and the applicants subsequently provided some more noise impact information, which has now been assessed and consulted on with our environmental health team. And therefore, members, I would like to refer you to your supplementary report, and under the section conditions, environmental health has stated that the further noise information submitted in support of the extension to operating hours is acceptable, and therefore it is acceptable to change the specific conditions with regards to operating hours. And in your supplementary, it does set out how these changes are proposed to be made. So in the event that planning permission was granted, the 2 conditions within your supplementary would be the operating hours. So that is, let me just read this for you. So condition 10, the development hereby permitted shall not operate outside of the building, outside of the hours of 6 AM till 6 PM, Monday to Friday. That is your change from your committee report. And with regards to condition 11, no material should be loaded or unloaded, units run or engines idled outside the hours of the following times, which is 7:30 AM, which is the change to your committee report, till 5 PM, Monday to Friday. And environmental health have no objections to the application in that regard. So just to show you the further presentation of the site, members. So this is the internal layout of the buildings once extended. So you can see the specific expansion and adaptation of the building and how that will be heavily utilised by the existing operation. And I've explained the layout in terms of the internal layout, the car parking, the HGV movements, and the individual uses of the building. Members, I would like to remind you that the description of development has been updated. So the entire site will be used as B2 and as Class E, which is offices. So I briefly showed you these, but these are the external elevations of the proposed buildings. So these are the buildings to the north of the site, wrapping round to that western boundary. And you can see that they are industrial buildings. And like I say, I'll show you some photos of what exists on the site currently. And then we're moving around to the southern building block that I did previously show you. And the main changes here are the external cladding, which will actually improve the appearance of those office blocks particularly. And the materials are listed in your report. So just to show you the site photos. So this is the existing access to the site. As I set out in the report, the visibility will be improved either side of the access, and this is a condition of the report. And you can see just to the right-hand side of the picture, there is a residential dwelling, and members who attended the site visit will note that there is a residential dwelling in that location, and we walked past it. There is, and you can see the glimpse of that northern block. So that is the northern elevation as you come through the access. So coming into the application site, these are the site photos. So this is the northern block, which exists currently on site. So metal clad at the top, brick at the bottom. And also in the far view of the picture, you can see the buildings which have come down the western side, which are to be demolished. And there would be the new building that's now angled away from neighbours in that location. And that is obviously a close-up of those buildings which are to be demolished and where the new extension on the western boundary will sit. This is a picture, so Bramley Lane and the garden behind is the other side of this close bordered fence. This is a picture to show the difference in ground levels within the site to that, and the angle of the existing building to show the distance away from the fence. And as previously set out, the new building will be slightly further away than this, but it's just to show the separation distance. This is going down the western boundary of the site. So this particular range of units is to be demolished, and there will actually be no buildings on this element of the site. This will be part of the additional car parking provided to meet the Highways Authority standards, that 96 spaces. And just in front of this building will provide your HGV turning space. And then I'm just panning around the site. This is to the southern boundary of the site. And this is to show the buildings which exist in that location. And these are the buildings that are restricted to Paragon Print by conditions. So this is that square block on the southern boundary. And then these are the images of the external office blocks, which will be used as offices. And just back to the current location plan for you. So in conclusion, members, the application has been dealt with under Section 70 of the Town and Country Planning Act, Section 38(6) of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act, Section 7, I'm saying 70 again, and paragraph 2 of the NPPF. And members, I will remind you again, this requires that applications for planning permission must be determined in accordance with the development plan, considering that development plan as a whole, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And the NPPF is a significant material planning consideration in the determination of any planning application. When looking at the development plan as a whole, the proposal is not considered to accord with policy EC04 of the Breckland Local Plan for the reasons I've already explained. However, there is compliance with the development plan as a whole, taking into account the support for employment, including in rural areas overall in the development plan, and as set out in policy Gen 01 of the Breckland Local Plan. And other relevant policies which have been discussed throughout the report are also relevant, and the proposal does accord with in highways, layout, design, amenity, ecology and tree terms. And those policies include Gen 01, Gen 02, Gen 03, COM 01, COM 03, EMV 06 and EMV 02 of the local plan. There are also strong material planning considerations which further support the grant of planning permission, including the NPPF. Specifically, these are Section 6 and paragraphs 81, 84 and 85 and Section 11 of the NPPF. The NPPF has been given significant weight in that it supports business investment and expansion, supporting economic growth and investment, and the sustainable growth and expansion of all types of business in rural areas through conversion and new buildings. It is also recognised that the site will meet local business needs in rural areas and may have been, the NPPF recognised that it's important to have local business needs in rural areas met, and these can be found adjacent to or beyond existing settlements and in locations that are not well served by public transport. Here, regard has been had to the sensitivity of the site and its surroundings, noting that there are no statutory objections to the application on the grounds of highway, amenity or character, and taking into consideration the fallback position as one of the material considerations that have been put in the planning balance. Finally, through the use of this previously development site, which is a mixed-use employment site and a brownfield site, and on this basis, there are strong material planning considerations which weigh in favour of the development as set out in paragraphs 81, 84 and 85 of the NPPF. The existing use of the land as a mixed-use employment site that could intensify, and the support for employment overall in the development plan as set out in policy Gen 01. These are considered to outweigh any conflict with any material planning consideration. These are considered to outweigh any conflict with policy EC04 of the Breckland Local Plan. Subject to further information being provided with regards to drainage and the LLFA have no objections from the development, then overall the proposal is considered acceptable, subject to the conditions which are listed at the end of the report, and it is recommended for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rebecca. Very comprehensive report. Well done. So it's over to our speakers. Councillor Cowan, would you like to go first or last?
Chairman, I'm wearing two hats today because this affects two parishes, Carston and Griston. I would like to go last, but I will be speaking on behalf of both parishes.
That's
So
fine.
my
Thank
3
you.
minutes might stretch.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, we'll start with Councillor Andy Parsons, please, of Griston Parish Council. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Griston as a village, the demographics have changed over recent years in that what was an industrial area down Church Road has now been fully handed over to a residential development, which is currently under development. Some additional 50 houses are under development and construction. This will increase the local traffic and footfall, pedestrian footfall in the village. Thompson Road and Church Road certainly don't have sufficient footpaths for pedestrian footfall. Thompson has no footpath at all, and Church Road only has one. The footpath down Church Road is fairly limited in terms of its quality and where it's actually located. Mainly constructed at the top end of the road by grass verge with some curbing further down the street. It's the parish council's considered opinion that the footpath and the safety of pedestrians with increased HGV traffic down Church Road is insufficient, and some sort of additional infrastructure needs to be put in place should additional HGVs be using Church Road. Church Road is the only access in and out of the Courtry estate. Its current condition is somewhat questionable. We also consider that there'll be a need for additional maintenance and repair costs from Breckland Council, even in terms of the usage. We challenge the highways assessment in terms of the HGV impact. The width of that road is not sufficient for 2 HGVs to pass. With the number of increased traffic, there will be occasions where HGVs will need to pass. And what currently happens is that the HGVs come up onto the footpath where it's a dropped curb, and also go up onto the grass verge approaching the footpath as well. So in addition to the comments that have already been submitted to the committee, we'd like to add those in addition to that. Also, with respect to the environmental assessment for the noise, previous sound assessments were done obviously when Courtry Estate was B1 use, in particular the paradigm printing noise assessment. Currently, I'm not sure how they've assessed the background noise within the village, but you can hear a pin drop there at the moment. So this additional 5 decibels I think is a desktop exercise at the moment, and it would be difficult to assess the amount of noise generated by the application. Fundamentally, Griston Parish Council oppose the change of use to B2 on that basis.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We've now got Mr. Philip Leslie, please, who's the applicant. 3 minutes, please, sir.
Morning. I'm Philip Leslie. I'm one of 4 brothers who set up Eastern Attachments back in 1996. It's been challenging, but we've developed a world-class. Sorry. Is that a little better? Thank you. Okay, yeah. Just yeah, I'm one of 4 brothers. We set up Eastern Attachments back in 1996. It has been difficult, challenging, but we have developed what is now a world-class engineering company that has booked the trend of importing agricultural products into the UK, and we actually export our products throughout the world now. For a number of years, we've had demand exceed the capacity that we've had at our existing sites in Attleborough, and have been searching for another viable site within Breckland. Many of you kindly visited our site at Griston and witnessed the potential improvements this facility would make to our operations, as well as securing local jobs and improving productivity. By approving this proposal today, you will be assisting us in our efforts to create a sustainable working environment which is attractive to those considering a future in engineering, a skill that is sorely needed. We believe a proposal both acknowledges and addresses the concerns of local residents. To clarify, we are not a heavy industry. We've invested in state-of-the-art machinery and processes to dramatically reduce the environmental impact we make. Transport figures provided are the upper limit, not averages. There have been a number of local residents who have expressed their support, as well as those who have opposed it. And we've seen some of these see this as a positive contribution to their community, and we've received, even recently, several requests for apprenticeships should the application be approved. This proposal represents the mitigation of our operations and allows for sustainable economic growth without the need for a less than desirable fallback option or our business to move outside the district. We have had a positive effect on our community within Attleborough and hope to do the same within Griston. I'm very happy to take any questions. Just picking up on one or two points whilst I've been over time. I know there's a lot of concerns, and we've been open to communication and been very cooperative in the way that we've approached this with those concerns that are raised. We hope that can continue. We don't want an adversarial relationship with our community. We want something where we can work in tandem to move forward. And that is the way we've always done business.
Thank you. I've got John Heath now, Griston Community Group. 3 minutes, sir.
Good morning. We ask you to set aside the financial and political considerations of this application and give weight to what is morally right and what your constituents are telling you. There are many Breckland local plan statutory policies being flouted or ignored, particularly in its strategic vision and objectives, general policies, policies on transport, economy and employment and communities. Please do ask me for detail. To be clear, this site was advertised and purchased as a B1, B8 light industry site, and this is reflected by virtue of the Town and Country Planning Use of Class Order 1987 and its planning permissions. The site is a B1, B8 light industry site, not a B2. To change from a B1 to a pop-up B2 heavy industry metal bashing operation in the centre of a quiet residential Brecks village breaks all the norms of planning and is totally reckless. The change of use from B1 to B2 in a residential area is never permitted by councils. The site has attached to it limited conditions of use for light industry set by Breckland Council from 2003 to present day. The applicant is seeking to remove the removal of noise protection, storage use only restrictions, height restriction and light industry only use, all currently in place for the protection of the local amenity. All planning officers over the last 20 years have protected the amenity of the village, so what has changed? After allowing residential build to within 2 to 10 metres of gardens and homes of the light industry storage units, why would you allow a heavy industry B2 into the buildings on the removal of preset conditions used for protecting residents' amenity? This plan relocation and development contravenes Breckland Local Plan Policy E04. The applicant's operation has a history of environmental pollution problems such as environmental noise and gas use explosion in Attleborough. The airborne pollution from 35 fabrication welding operations with gas usage, 4 paint spraying and 3 shot blasting processes will have a massive toll on the health and well-being of this Brecks village. Breakout cumulative noise from this operation and its huge ventilation stacks has not been provided, and it wasn't shown in your photograph. The introduction of HGVs onto the village's small through road introduces an unacceptable risk for the lives of our children and elderly, where we have little or no footpaths, endangering the adjacent care home residents, emergency services and our bus route. Remodelling the site access has been ignored. It's not compliant with sustainable transport policies. You will destroy the national cycle network Route 13, along which you will channel all of this traffic. The Lee Flood Authority has refused this planning application. In conclusion, 3 points. Environmental Health have stated, I continue to have concerns in respect to the levels of noise that will be generated by the proposed development. Highways have stated, I will still retain my concern that the use is located in an unsustainable location. And I repeat, unsustainable location. This B2 operation must remain on a general employment area, particularly Attleborough, due to its environmental and health and well-being impacts. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cohen, please. 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. So members, firstly, just to talk about the impact of this development on Carston Village. Clearly, this sits in Griston, but if those of you who understand the geography of this part of Breckland, to get from Griston to the A11 at Attleborough, you actually travel through Carston. Carston at the moment is struggling and suffering from enhanced traffic movements, and there is serious concern that because the current operation is located in Attleborough, because the employees live in and around Attleborough rather than Griston, there is likely to be an adverse increase in traffic through the village. The village is already suffering, as I say, and noise levels in Carston Village have been recorded as being significantly higher than are the norm. The other problem, of course, is that it's not just Carston, it's also Northacre, which is a small residential lane, which is also seeing increased volumes of traffic. And as we've heard from the officer, we can't, as a planning authority, impose conditions on traffic and routing, because any routing condition that is applied to a planning application is only relevant to vehicles in the direct control of the applicant themselves. And we've seen that happen elsewhere in the district, where vehicles that are not owned and operated by the applicant in any particular instance are not controlled and cannot be controlled by any conditions imposed by a planning authority, let alone Breckland. So that's the situation as pertains to Carston. When I think about Griston, I've represented Griston now since the boundary changes a few years ago, and I can recall that village having quite substantial heavy industry, because Quantrill's Steelworks sat on Church Road, and Courtree's Engineering Works, Timber Engineering Works, the site of which we're discussing today, sat there as well. And it was quite a low-grade operation, but it was still noisy. Subsequently, and over time, and as I look at the Google Earth images of that particular location back from 1999 to present day, we see Quantrill's have gone, so the heavy engineering has disappeared. We see that the Courtree's Engineering Works substantially changed because Paragon Print moved in, and the kind of operation they had was different from to the Courtree Engineering. And we've seen a significant mixed-use development on that site for a number of years until it became largely vacant. The rider to all of that, of course, is that this planning committee granted consent for residential developments immediately adjacent to that site, and actually on the opposite side of Church Road where Quantrill Engineering was located. So that the landscape, if you will, of the village in this part of the village has substantially changed. It is now largely residential, notwithstanding the fact that this site still exists. It's essentially a brownfield site, and it needs some work doing to it. There is no doubt about that. And I can understand why our officers have taken the line that they've taken, why you as members of the planning committee, listening to all of the arguments relating to policy, might find yourself somewhat conflicted in your views. But what has, I believe, not been stated sufficiently is the change of the village as a direct result of planning applications made to this committee over time, which has seen the nature of this part of the village change considerably. And that is all about the residential development that's happened. And then you move on from that to talk about the points that have been raised by the parish council about the footpaths. The footpath along Church Road is woefully inadequate. It is now used by significantly more people than ever was contemplated back in 1999 when I look at the first Google image. And the roads are inadequate to cope with the volume of traffic which is now proposed compared with the pedestrians living in the houses. I urge you to consider those points. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. It's over to questions from members. Councillor Bowes, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a question for the applicant and for officers, if it's Rebecca's. So, to the applicant, why, given the nature of your business, are you moving from an area close to the A11 tech corridor to a small rural village? Surely you must recognise that Church Road is not a suitable road for constant HGV use. And I find it hard to believe that there are no suitable sites along the tech corridor. So, and then to officers, how enforceable is the traffic routing condition as requested by Highways in the report? Because from what I've heard and as things stand, I can't support the application unless I'm convinced that there'll be no extra HGV and other traffic movements generated by this site through the village of Carston. And another question on flooding, the LLFA have objected to this, and there is still no drainage strategy coming forward from the applicant. Why is that? And I don't think this committee, I think this committee should hear the drainage strategy. It seems to be being put off for some reason, and I don't think it should be delegated. I think we should hear it at this committee. Thank you.
Mr. Leslie, are you prepared to answer yours, please?
Sorry, there we go. I'll try and take it closer. There we go. On the point about why we're looking at this site, as I said, for a number of years, we've tried to find alternative sites up and down the A11 tech corridor, but there are not sufficient sites there that have the power or the amenities in place. The tech corridor itself is a bit of false advertising. It's great in principle, but it doesn't have the power or the resources or the availability to build on there to deliver what the tech corridor aspirations are. We've looked, we've been up and down the A11, we've made previous applications on sites which amenities weren't able to be provided on. We have tried and exhausted every operation. We now stand in a commercial position where we are letting down our customers such as JCB and others, because we are not able to facilitate the orders that are coming into ourselves. We had to find somewhere that was available now that we could build into and have the available resources of power and amenity that allowed us to develop as a company going forward. The alternative is moving outside the region, which we really don't want to do. So does that help answer the question?
Are you happy with that answer? Sorry. Are you happy with that answer, Councillor Bowes? Sufficient. Okay. Rebecca, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So we're hearing a lot about increased traffic, members. So where we need, Councillor. Oh, sorry. We're hearing a lot about increased traffic, members, and what I need to do is pull you back to your Highways Authority recommendation. So it is clearly set out in the officer report under the Highways section of their comments under the date 13/11/2022, where they say the remainder of the site has unrestricted B1, B8 use, which could consequently generate an equal amount or even more vehicular traffic than the proposed user, both in the number of movements and the size of vehicles involved. So it is not a material consideration, members, that there will be an increase in traffic movements or HGVs, because your statutory consultees are telling you that the use of this site could be such that the highways movements, without the need for a further planning permission, will be higher than what the development is proposing here. And you've also heard from the applicants that the highways movements set out in the transport assessment on average figures, which is the norm. We've asked them to go for the maximum figures. So the highways movements will be lower than that was assessed by the Highways Authority. So we're hearing a lot about increased highway movements, impact on footpath, more HGVs going through Caston, when the reality is that your statutory consultees that you need to take their advice in the planning balance are telling you that's not the case with this development. Moving on to the condition itself, the Highways Authority recommended a specific traffic routing condition. You'll note from the report, we haven't applied that condition. We don't believe that such a condition is reasonable or enforceable. But what we have done is applied a condition for a HD management plan. We've done this at Chalk Lane and other places within the district. So we're asking for tangible measures that we can check have been put into place, like signage, to be erected to direct the direction of HGVs. We are offering that as officers, so we do believe it's enforceable, but that is not the point. The key point is the actual number of traffic generated from this development will be less than or equal to that on this site in full operation. And, you know, there is no operations on that site currently because the applicants have bought the site and they've not moved in and started operating on it. So you've got to compare the existing mixed-use employment site from what the traffic generation, and your Highways Authority have said there will be no increase in movements. With regards to the Highways Authority, I have spoken to them personally. It is a matter that can be resolved with regards to the drainage strategy. The applicants are continuing to have conversations. It is a small element of the flood risk assessment that is required. We have asked for that to be delegated. Obviously, members, that is completely within your remit not to delegate that to us and want to hear it back at planning committee, but we have done this on a number of occasions with a number of applications in the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Kai Bird, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Question for the applicant. What is the anticipated number of daily HGV movements, and how does that compare with the use when it was built as merchants?
Thank you. It does help me clarify this point a little bit. At our full operation at the moment in Attleborough, which we have two industrial sites opposite each other, we're working at overcapacity there. On average, we have 5 lorries a day. 5. This new site allows us a 50% increase in our capacity. Well, if you were talking to say 8, but on the application we've put 12. That's kind of an idea of where we are. We're not particularly a high volume user, and we try to address things with HGVs where very often the steel that's delivered into ourselves will be the same vehicle that takes products back somewhere else within the country. It shows sustainability, economics, but also lowers the impact of having vehicles on site as well. So we relatively to a distribution centre, a B1, B8 use, have a fraction of the lorries that could be used. HGVs themselves, I would say our average at the moment is between 5 and 6. I would say at the new site, even at full operation, between 8, 9. But we've put 12 on there because we wanted it to be a fair reflection of the worst case scenario.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Gilbert, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know if anybody can answer this question, but are we looking at light industrial or heavy industrial? I mean, when does a light industrial use become heavy industrial use? It's a thorny one, which we've heard with the two people, that one says it's a light industry and somebody else says it's heavy. And metal bashing, is there any definition that we can look at?
I'll go over to the applicant, please. It's probably easier to get an answer. I know you were on the site visit, Councillor Gilbert, and experienced don't know what you call it. They press sheet to press, press, and then some other works that were happening in some of the other buildings, but I'll allow an answer from the applicant, please.
Just to help explain this, the internationally recognized definition of heavy industry is that it can't happen within a traditional industrial unit, that it's prohibitive for the expensive machinery coming into it, that it requires specialist site and applications for environmental concern, and so on and so forth. Something like a steel foundry or an automotive line or something of that ilk, where you wouldn't normally be able to fit it into or shoehorn it into a normal industrial site or a facility. And I think we need to clarify, we are not making big lumps of steel here that require great big arctics to move them out. The HEVs come, load on palletized products, so they fit on a pallet. They're loaded on by a fork truck. They are very often have between 10 and 20 and 30 items on a single lorry. They are not what we would consider heavy industry. Within engineering ourselves, we are considered on the lighter end of it. The machinery, for those who came and saw the demonstration at the site, will recognize you could talk at this volume over the machinery in operation. That in itself demonstrates it's not steel bashing. It's not heavy industry. It's considered light industry.
Okay, thank you. I think
Thank
that's
you.
answered enough. Can I go to Rebecca, please, on an item of planning consideration?
Can I just take this opportunity, members, to remind you of your material planning considerations? So your proposal is for a full planning permission for a B2 operation. A B2 operation is general industrial, if I can speak. So the use of industrial purposes other than one falling within Class E. And Class E, which was your old B1 use class, for those of you who've been around as long as me, uses which are uses which can be carried out in a residential area without detriment to its amenity. So that's your E use class, but the application is for a B2 in general industrial use class. Members, it's not, the use of the existing site is one of the material considerations in the determination of this application, of which you have many to consider in the determination of this application. But the B2 use that's been proposed has raised no objections in terms of highways movements. It's raised no objections in terms of more noise or from environmental health in terms of detriment to amenity. So it is a B2 use in an employment area, but it has raised no statutory objections in having it in this location. And therefore it's not a comparison of what the use could be or would have been before. It's, is this use acceptable in this location? And it will be up to you to determine, based on the material in front of you, whether this is an appropriate use in that location. But I would like to remind you there are no statutory objections on the basis of this B2 use in this location. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Attwell, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a few questions, if I may. I probably need to direct some of these to Rebecca first. Can I just talk about the highway access to the site? I think you had a plan up there, Rebecca, with suggested improvements to the access. Could you just bring that up for me, please? Okay, so if I'm seeing that right, we're going to improve the visibility display on the site. And I'm just curious to know how we're going to do that on the left-hand side, looking at the photograph that you showed of the residential dwelling to the left of the T junction. I was just wondering how you're going to achieve that is that actually in the ownership of this applicant? There. So that one, that photo you just had up, that's the photo I want to see. Can I see the photo, please? So just to make my point, if I'm looking at that right, that residential dwelling, is that a fence along the roadside there? So is that a building in the ownership of this? It is. Okay, right.
So what the highways wants to see is the reduction of that hedgerow in the visibility display, and then they're satisfied that there's sufficient visibility for that access. So they want to see a reduction in that vegetation either side that's in the visibility display, and then they're satisfied that that's sufficient.
Okay, just one sec. While we've got that on, can you just go to the site plan so we can just confirm, because someone's saying they own a building that's, if it's in.
neighbours own this building, yeah.
Oh, can we just see the site plan there so I can see what's redlined and what's not? Halfway through that building, I can see it now. Yep, that's fine. I don't know hang on, let me go to that. I just want clarity for members. Someone at the back saying about this is the building you can see on the road from the photo, but the site plan does come halfway through that building. All right, so not that I want to see that little old building demolished, but the idea is to probably reduce on this. Okay, I just want to make sure we were clear on what we had as a plan. Okay, sorry, Councillor Atwell, carry on.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Right, also on the HGVs, I would feel happier considering this application if I actually had the HGV management plan. Because you're saying that that's a condition that you're going to agree with the applicant later on, but Highways have said that they would like to see a condition imposed about the direction of travel, and you're saying that that's not enforceable, but I don't have the alternative here. I don't have the management plan to consider. You're saying you're going to leave that after this meeting for you to have a chat with the applicant. And for me, sitting here as a committee member, it seems to me that based on what Councillor Cowan has said earlier on, he obviously knows the area better than I do. I'd like to understand from the management plan how the HGV situation is going to be managed rather than leaving that to a condition. So that was a comment. Also, there was mention earlier on about ventilation, about the welding processes in this building. I think this gentleman mentioned it. So what is there chimneys on this building and the ventilation and what's involved in that, and what have environmental health said? Where are the chimneys in relation to the site, please, Rebecca?
So with the HGV management plan, you only apply a condition where it's needed to make the development acceptable. We have discussed the condition with the applicants and they're happy to try and improve the situation with HGVs. But I go back to the point that I've made initially, members, is that Highways Authority have confirmed that there's no increase in HGV movements. In fact, there's likely to be less HGV movements from this development than that business that's already permitted on site. So arguably that condition is not needed to make the development acceptable. However, in discussions with the applicant, they have agreed that they are happy to make best endeavours to ensure that the HGV movements aren't travelling on those local roads or routes that aren't acceptable. They're happy to pay for the erection of signage to do that. They're happy to provide information to all their drivers. And in condition 9, they're listed out the things that we want to see. Now, obviously, if members want to see the exact location of the signage to make that work in their deliberations, then obviously we would need to defer to get that information. But the important thing to your deliberations, members, today is that there is no increase in HGVs as set out by your Highways Authority from this development. So that condition in effect is not actually needed to make this development acceptable. What we have done though is we've discussed it with the applicant and they volunteered this information and we're prepared to condition it. With regards, do you want me to do the vents or do you want to come back on that first?
Let's let Rebecca, and then you can come back on board, please. Carry on,
Okay,
Rebecca.
so the flues, which I think is a specific reference, are these, which are these two elements. So there is one on site currently, which is here, and then there'll be a second one. Can you see that? You can see that, can't you? And then,
Good elevation.
and then these are the shown on the elevation. These have been part of the plans throughout the process. Environmental health have been consulted on them. The air quality officer has been consulted with specific regard to these, and they have no objections based on the ventilation specification, which has been submitted by the applicants in that regard.
Okay, coming back on your two questions, please. I will come to you, sir, because I think it's only fair that we have a bit more balance. Thank you.
So just coming back on the highway thing, all very interesting that the applicant says they want to work with us, but I would like to have seen that information because I think reading this report from Highways have said they can't substantiate an objection. However, they would like to see a condition in place regarding the routing of the HGVs. So Highways have said they can't substantiate an objection, unless I'm reading this wrong, Rebecca. They can't substantiate an objection, but they would like to see that condition put in place. You're now saying you're not prepared to put that condition in place because it's not enforceable. So we're not really getting what the Highways Authority have asked us to consider putting in place in the first place. So that's why I'm asking for the management. That's why I'm asking to see the management plan for the HGVs, because I hear what you're saying. You say that there's no vehicle increases, but this is clearly a very important consideration for the people who live in that village. So I don't think I've got the information to make that assessment. Also, can I just say, something was said about, I think Philip Cannon said it. Can you show me on a plan where these developments are that this committee has given permission for in recent years? Sorry.
I did point them out in my presentation, say this is the residential location, but I will show you again. Just with regard to the Highways Authority, we have discussed with them that the routing condition isn't enforceable and won't be imposed on the application. And they are fully aware that they're of that matter and are not objecting to the application on that basis. And also, members, we have requests for conditions from all parties. It is up to you as members of the Planning Committee and us as planning officers to apply the tests in the Planning Act as to whether those conditions are unreasonable and enforceable. It is not up to the statutory consultees in their comments to apply those tests. It is up to us as officers and members of the Planning Committee to do that. And in that regard, you can only consider the material planning considerations. And I appreciate there's lots of concern about HGV movements and increased HGV movements and the increase that they would have. But I have to go back to the point that your material planning consideration is that your statutory consultee tells you that there will be no material increase. And therefore, as officers and members of the committee, we have to consider which are reasonable conditions and which are not reasonable conditions to apply. And obviously, I've given you my advice in that regard, but you obviously have an ability to take a different opinion on that, obviously. Sorry. So this is the new residential development that's gone in here, Bramley Close, which is mentioned in the report. And if I just go back to the location plan, it's this section here, just to the north of the site. These are new single-story residential dwellings.
Excuse me, Chairman,
And
that's not-
Yeah, no. Also, I think what they're referring to is the other side of the road and south of that plan where I think it just says L substation. down there used to be quite heavy industry. It escapes me the name, Phil. Corntrals, that's right. So yeah, that was metal bashing. That was very intense, and it outlived itself and has moved or ceased. And now typical brownland sites that we've allowed development on there. So that's why we've got substantial housing and what have you all along there, and various little pockets of industrial, yeah, exactly, other industrial units that have then been done away with and built on. Sorry, coming back.
So in effect, what you're saying is we have allowed residential development to be, we've given it permission around this site, we've effectively surrounded it. So if we were building the houses first, I've got to ask the question to the planning officer, would you say it is then reasonable to introduce a B2 development into a mainly residential area? Because that to me doesn't just that doesn't sit well with me. Why have we allowed all these permissions around it, and then we're basically pulling the rug from under people's foot and saying we're going to put a B2 development next to it? I have a final question on the acoustics, if I may. Can I? So the cladding, Rebecca, because I couldn't read what was up there. So the cladding, is it an acoustic style cladding, or is it just a bulk standard tin cladding that's going to be put on particularly on the rear, I would say, of the north elevation, where you've got the main new development we've given permission to? Is that acoustic style cladding?
There are two elements. So I discussed specifically the aesthetic cladding on the front of the offices, but the rear buildings will be clad to be noise insulated. And if you want the details of that, the applicant will give you the details of what they're doing there.
Did you answer to your first bit then? You got me with clad, there was something before that. Oh, the B2 uses, etc. That we put, well.
So in terms of introducing any use into the area, you've got to consider it against policy and your material planning considerations. And that is what the Planning Act tells you to do, and that is what the NPPF tells you to do. And in front of you, you have my report, which looks specifically at all the policies that are relevant to this development. It weights those policies in a specific way. It's completely within your remit, members, to take an alternative weighting, and it considers any other material considerations. So in answer to your question, Councillor Atterall, I would say that any B2 development that is proposed in a residential area would be considered on its own merits. And if, like this application, there is no identifiable amenity impact or highways impact, then it would be recommended for approval for members to consider in the same way as they must in accordance with the Planning Act.
I will allow you to come back, Councillor Atwell, and apologies to Councillor Wilton, who's waiting.
My last one, apologies, Councillor Wilton. So, Rebecca, could you just explain for me very simply why this doesn't comply with policy EC04? Because that's a material consideration for members sitting here today. I hear what you're saying about the NPPF, but could you just specifically outline why this application doesn't meet the criteria in EC04, please?
I can. So at paragraph 1.7 of your report, it sets out what policy EC04 says verbatim. So it says proposals for employment use outside of identified general employment areas and allocated sites, which this is, will be permitted where there are particular reasons for the development not being located on an established or allocated employment site, including the expansion of a business. Sorry, I'm jumping up the page. Businesses that are based on agricultural, forestry, or other industry where there are sustainable advantages to being located in close proximity, industries and businesses which would be detrimental to local amenity if located in settlements, including general employment areas. So policy EC04 specifically requires, if you permit employment outside of employment areas, it to meet one of those three criteria. We are saying that it doesn't meet any of those three criteria as employment outside other employment areas, But you must, members, consider other material considerations, of which the MPPF would have significant weight, should have significant weight. You must consider that there's an existing mixed use employment area and the noise and the traffic and that could generate. And you must consider, all those other material considerations in terms of compliance with the development plan as a whole in your determination of this planning application. So you have no argument from me as officer that this application doesn't comply with ECO4, but they are strong material considerations that weigh in favour of it, and that is what's been set out in your officer report.
I will allow a return.
Thank you for that. Is it also true that the MPPF states that planning applications have to be considered and determined in accordance with the determined local development plan, of which this council has one?
Mr. Horn.
Councillor, if your question is, would it be possible for you to weigh up all the planning policies, including the stated non-compliance with ECO4, plus to weigh up material planning considerations, and for you as a committee conclude that putting everything into the melting pot and making your planning judgment, you come to a different conclusion to your planning officers, that is perfectly permissible and reasonable.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to put a bit of a balance on the transport situation, I went to the site meeting and my sat nav took me up to 1075 from well northwest of this district, and a short hop on Thompson Road, which was quite a reasonably good stretch of road by the prison, and then a short hop to the site on Church Lane. In my opinion, I can't imagine lorries turning left and wanting to go through Griston to come back down to Thompson Road. And I cannot imagine our HGVs accessing back to Thetford and the A14, which they will come from if that gentleman's customer, I heard that gentleman say his customer is JCB in the East Midlands. They are never going to be coming down through Caston or Griston. I can't imagine them turning that way. And I've just asked the applicant if he would put a right-hand turn, no left turn, right-hand turn in his site and right again onto the 1065.
I think the argument was more the fact that the majority of staff currently employed live in and around the Attleborough area, and with that in mind, they would probably most of them come through Caston. That I think was the reference.
No.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay, I'll go with the applicant. That's how I read it, but obviously wrong. Applicant.
Just to answer the one question, yes, absolutely. 99.9% comes from the A11 route south of Thetford route, so it would be coming up that route. It makes no sense to go anywhere else. We have a diversity of staff that live over the region, to be fair. The two main pockets of staff live in Norwich and Thetford. Less than 1/3 of our staff live in Attleborough or the surrounding villages. So the vast majority of our staff will be coming via Watton or Thetford, which wouldn't be coming through Caston.
Sorry. Okay. I was led to believe it's coming from Attleborough because of its existing operation. I do apologise for leading members wrongly. Now, I have said to the gentleman over there who's Griston Community Group, just simply so we can get some balance, if you'd like to just ask a question if you wish, but I'm not going to tell you to keep it brief, but please do not run on. Thank you.
Just picking up on what Councillor Attawell picked on in terms of asking about statutory local plan policies. ECO4 and COM02, which is healthy lifestyles, those are the really two planning policies that protect Breck's rural communities. So ECO4 is vital for us. And therefore, if it doesn't meet ECO4, it's going to totally destroy this Breck's village. With regard to COM02, again, that's healthy lifestyles. And what's really, really concerning is that Brex villages, rural communities are not being considered by planning if planning do not consider ECO2. And ECO2 was not considered as one of those policies that have been listed. So that has left us, I think, in an unhappy situation where this doesn't seem to have been an impartial review. I'm sorry to say that, but that's my view. Thank you.
Thank you. Response, please.
So we've discussed ECO4 at length, and we were in agreement that it's not in compliance with that, but you have to take into consideration other material considerations, and that's what I've set out today. With regards to policy COM02, that is your healthy lifestyles, I would remind members that there is no objection from environmental health or your air quality team or your contamination team in regard to this application. There is no objection whatsoever from those members in terms of the air quality of areas, the pollutants, the health and well-being. We've accepted within the officer report that this is moving an operation, part of an operation, from a sustainable location into an unsustainable, potentially unsustainable location. This is still within one of your settlement boundaries, members, but we have addressed that in detail within the report. And the matter of consideration is that on balance, the units are of a similar scale and the job numbers produced, and you can see that within the levels of parking, are of a similar scale. And therefore, the workers from that site could come from anywhere in the district and be travelling. So the balance in discussion with the Highways Authority is, yes, you're moving an operation from a sustainable location to a less sustainable location. However, there will be people travelling to that location. And as you've heard from the applicants, their staff aren't all from Attleborough and naturally walking to work either. So with having specifically regard to COM02, sorry, keep going. Having specific regard to COM02, having looked at the wording of the policy, you have no objection from your environmental health, which are already statutory consultees, and therefore there is no reason to conclude, in my view, that there will be a refusal in having regard to COM02. Thank you.
Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a comment from me that I've listened very closely, intently to this complicated but not complicated application. Really just to say that I agree with Councillor Attle in terms of his remarks about the HGV and the plan, that whilst there isn't a statutory objection, I, like him, would be a lot happier, I put it no stronger than that, in terms of actually seeing something there, rather on this occasion leaving this matter to be delegated. Normally I would be happy to have that delegated, but I think given the, the wider concerns, I'd be happy to support that coming back, that aspect coming back to committee if that's possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay, everything okay? I will just accept your one piece, because you did seem as if you were itching. I don't mind, but please, again, keep it brief. Microphone on, please.
In COM02, healthy lifestyles, it does state that there should be a health impact assessment done because of the size of this development. And secondly, if that isn't done, certainly a healthy planning checklist should have been completed. And I disagree entirely. We've got 35 welding, we've got fumes coming out of these 3 ventilation stacks, and there is actually 3 of them. One of them is at the rear of that. There's going to be quite a bit of pollution from this works. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Noted. Okay, members, I'm going to put it to the vote so that we can see where we're going with this. So with regards to our deferred item 8A at Griston, reference 3PL 2022-0368. This is a full application. Your officer's recommendation is one of approval. Can I have a show of hands, please? 8, and those against? 3. Okay, This item is approved. Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. We will have just a short break and resume at 12 o'clock. Anyone who wishes to